All right, good morning, Sacramento. This is Craig Ashton. The show is all things legal. This is where curious personal injury attorneys distill topical events into the legal essence. Today, instead of the plural, it's a singular. I'm here on my own, Edward Shady, my colleague, where you typically want a shady attorney giving you legal advice, at least on this show. It's just getting back from a very shady wedding in Texas. And then Tim is in court today, so Tim Hodson. So I am here on my own, but I will make sure that I make this entertaining and informative for you. Hopefully you'll enjoy this hour and definitely will improve your Jeopardy game. So if you never listened to the show, essentially what we do, we're personal injury attorneys at Ashton & Price. Been doing this now personally for 24 years. Started practicing law in San Francisco on Montgomery Street, right down the street from the Transamerica building with Arnold Laub. His contemporary was Melvin Belli. As a different kind of animal back then in the when they started practicing in the 60s and 70s. Melvin Belli used to blow off a cannon every time he had a big case, and he had the scales of justice balancing on the middle finger. So that was kind of the San Francisco personal injury enclave there off Montgomery Street. And so we've been personal injury attorneys now in Sacramento with Ashton & Price for 21 years. But, you know, we don't talk about that during this show, although I'm going to break down a case against FedEx for $1.3 million that I mediated yesterday and kind of give you a sense about what we're up against as plaintiffs' lawyers in cases against big corporations. But basically we would kind of break down topical events. So this week we've got the U.S. Open. So we'll talk about Tiger Woods and the Vicodin Xanax issue within the context of Proposition 64, which is the legalization of marijuana for recreational purposes. Right now they are in the legislature here in Sacramento trying to come up with some rules. All the licensing happens on January 1st, 2018. Right now you are fully able to smoke marijuana recreationally. You can't drive, so I'm going to break down all the rules, and this was in the Sacramento Bee, but I'm going to break down the rules in regards to open container, in regards to driving, in regards to how much marijuana you can have, how much you can grow, etc., within the confines of Prop 64, and then break down the way that they're going to test for these things, because when you blow a .00 but you look like you're impaired, guess what? Stone driving is the same as drunk driving, and Xanax and Vicodin driving is the same as drunk driving. So we'll talk about Tiger Woods and what he went through within the confines of the testing under Prop 64 and all the rules associated with medicinal marijuana and legalized recreational marijuana under Prop 64. Then I'll break down this kind of interesting case. Her name is Corinne Olympios. I don't watch this show, but it's called Bachelor in Paradise. I have spent a bit of time in the Yucatan Peninsula. I really like Chichen Itza. Took my mom there just before she passed away. Found out my mom had stage 4 breast cancer. She had a couple operations. I said, Mom, you got to travel with me. So I took her to Australia. She saw me finish Ironman in Melbourne, and I took her to the Great Barrier Reef. I took her to Cambodia. I took her to Thailand. And at the end of the Mayan calendar on December 21st, 2013, I said, Mom, let's go to Chichen Itza. And she goes, Craig, I don't know if I can travel. I said, Mom, it's not about you. It's about me. You get me through customs. So she went, and I took her to all throughout the Yucatan Peninsula. She was in a wheelchair. She got to see the end of the Mayan calendar, and then I got to say goodbye to her properly. But her journey was an interesting one all the way up to the very end. So I'm very, very familiar with the Yucatan Peninsula as a result of spending some time there with my mother, and also just really enjoying that part of the world. The history there is pretty amazing. Having spent some time in Cambodia at Angkor Wat, the next best thing in regards to the spiritualism and kind of the connection to history that goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years, is going to be the Mayan and the Aztec cultures. And so if you haven't had a chance to go to the Yucatan Peninsula, do that. But in regards to this, from a legal perspective, we've got this Corinne Olympios, who is a bit of a gadfly. She's been on this Bachelor program a bunch of times. She's kind of got a history of making out with a bunch of different people on the show, disrobing relatively often. So she is accusing one of the contestants of essentially raping her in a pool at a resort while filming Bachelor in Paradise. So we'll talk about alcohol in the workplace. We'll talk about extraterritorial jurisdiction. And that goes all the way back to the Founding Fathers. So believe it or not, we can tie this Corinne Olympios and the Bachelor in Paradise to George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, going all the way back to extraterritorial jurisdiction and how Mexican law is going to apply in this case, and it's going to make it very complicated. Talking about complicated, what do Dennis Rodman and a 18th century Philadelphia Quaker have in common. It's called the Logan Act. So Dennis Rodman is in North Korea on a quote-unquote mission, meeting with Kim Jong-un. And there's a question as to whether or not our current president, who was the MC of The Apprentice, who had Dennis Rodman as one of his contestants on that show, actually sent Dennis Rodman as an emissary of the United States of America, or whether or not Dennis Rodman is over there talking to Kim Jong-un on behalf of the United States. And if he is, then perhaps he's going to be in violation of the Logan Act. So think about this. North Korea is the most hermetically sealed, from an informational perspective, country in the world. Bhutan, which is, they measure their gross domestic product by gross domestic happiness. They're in the Himalayas. They have way more interaction with the outside world than North Korea does. And North Korea's really only popular understanding of U.S. citizens is a 6'9" or 10 tattooed African-American individual who sang happy birthday to Kim Jong-un, who's the son of Kim Jong-il, who is the grandson of Kim Il-sung, the great leader, the dear leader, et cetera, sang happy birthday to Kim Jong-un in the voice of Marilyn Monroe. That's what North Korea. So we'll talk about Dennis Rodman, the Logan Act, and his visit to North Korea, and whether or not he's just there, whatever this mission is, and whether or not it's official or not, and whether or not finally somebody actually might get prosecuted under the Logan Act. Probably will never happen, but all right, then I'll go ahead and break down a case that I had yesterday with a mediation. Mediation is an informal setting whereby two sides that disagree within the confines, usually of a personal injury cause of action, can sit down with a neutral individual to kind of help them resolve the distillation of the imperfect remedy of money. Both sides usually are not happy with the outcome, and that usually is a good outcome because the other side pays more than they want, and the other end, our side takes less than we want. So this is a case where clear liability, a red light violation by an employee of FedEx. The employee of FedEx denied. They actually pointed to my client and said, "Why'd you run the red light?" Good thing for my client, there was a witness who said that guy blew right by me and ran the red light. Ultimately, she was with her husband for 47 years, 43 years married. He was 5 years in Vietnam. He was on a riverboat in Vietnam in 1971. And she had 3-level neck surgery. They had an opportunity to resolve the case for $500,000. They ignored it. She had the surgery, and it turned out to be $344,000 instead of $150,000, so the demand went up to $800,000. They ignored it. And then when she was recovering from surgery, her husband died unexpectedly. And so FedEx stole her ability to properly say goodbye to her husband while he was dying of a progressive disease. So the demand went up to $1.4 million, and then yesterday the attorney offered $95,000 and got all worked up and said my client is going to play the widow card. So my feeling is if they're going to have a aggressive, cantankerous defense attorney who gets paid by the hour no matter what, basically call into question to say that my client somehow is milking the process by overblowing and being hyperbolic about losing her partner of 47 years and husband of 43, when FedEx stole her ability to say goodbye to her husband properly, to bathe him, to clothe him, to hold his hand. He fell down. She couldn't even get him up to get him to the hospital because she was literally had neck surgery about 10 days before, a 3-level, very complicated neck surgery. So my feeling for the attorney for FedEx, Richard Jacobson is his name, ultimately, let's bring it. This is going to be something where plaintiffs' lawyers dream of the ability to take a large corporation in front of a jury where the defense attorney is going to pile on the widow who had 3-level neck surgery and has $340,000 in medical care, especially when the defendant lied about running the red light. So that was my day yesterday. If we have a chance, we'll talk about United. What if their workers pushed down a 71-year-old attorney, left him on the ground for 3 minutes? I got video of that. And we got a Wyoming woman caught shoplifting, but she said she was studying kleptomania in college, and that's what drove her to do it. So those are the topics for today. So hopefully you will join us, and I'll promise to improve your Jeopardy game and make this hour entertaining for you. My name is Craig Ashton. The show is All Things Legal. Please stay with me. All right, we're back. This is Craig Ashton. The show is All Things Legal. This is where personal injury attorneys, typically the plural, today is singular, distill topical events into the legal essence. Today is no different. We are personal injury attorneys by trade, but guess we like to read, and I like to read. I was a history major at Berkeley. So the interesting thing for me is when I read the stories that I'm about ready to recount for you, there's usually a legal foundation which would not be obvious to those that are reading the story essentially without some direction from a legal perspective. For instance, we got Tiger Woods, which we can tie into Prop 64, which we can tie into the opioid epidemic, and then we can tie in Korean Olympios and the Bachelor in Paradise to essentially extraterritorial jurisdiction, and going all the way back to the Founding Fathers. And we've got even Dennis Rodman and the Logan Act going back to 1799. So those are things that I think are kind of interesting, and hopefully you think so as well, and make this hour go by in a way that will improve your Jeopardy game and allow you to have interesting discourse at your next dinner party. All right, so let's start out with Tiger Woods. This is U.S. Open week, and Tiger Woods, poor guy. I mean, he's had 4 back surgeries. So the reason that, I'm aware of this, I used to play on golf too. Actually, my handicap used to be down to a 4, so I used to be a pretty good golfer. I like to do triathlons now, but, I do follow golf because, I like golf. And Tiger Woods, one of the greatest golfers of all time, and then ultimately he ended up with a back injury. And the first surgery that he had was a microdiscectomy. So that is the least invasive procedure typically from a surgical perspective. Usually you can go microdiscectomy, and then you can have fusion, disc replacement. The disc replacement procedure at this point, at least based upon our anecdotal observation, because we are personal injury attorneys that deal with neck and back injuries primarily, the disc replacement is a pretty miraculous procedure whereby they remove the disc, put in a prosthesis, and allow you the range of motion. So 10 years down the line, you don't have issues pertaining to degeneration on the levels above and below the area that has been operated on. So Tiger Woods, his doctors took a really conservative approach, and the first one didn't work, the second one didn't work, third one didn't work. He's had 4 surgeries now. And that leads to a lot of long-term problems when it doesn't work, especially when you're using your back to swing a golf club and using the torque and leverage that's associated with swinging that golf club to hit the golf ball puts a lot of pressure on the lumbar spine. So Tiger, unfortunately, has been medicating it because he's in pain. So he's got Xanax and then Vicodin, and he was taking those together apparently. And he was found on May 29th basically slumped over his wheel, and I think it was in Florida, and with damage to his vehicle. So it's not a good thing. I mean, one of the things that happens, and we've noticed this within the confines of our practice, and it's pretty topical now in regards to the opioid epidemic, is that there was a school of thought a few years ago that the best way to approach pain was just to medicate it. So Vicodin, Norco, oxycodone, Oxycontin, very significant opioids and narcotics that ultimately lead to addiction. So now we got this massive addiction problem where because people get in accidents, they were prescribed this medication, then they become addicted to it, becomes more expensive. And guess what? Heroin's less expensive to get than Oxycontin, so that's what people are doing is heroin. That's why we have this opioid epidemic at this point. That's one of the reasons for it. So Tiger Woods kind of finds himself in a situation where there is a sense that because something's been prescribed that you have an invitation to take it and it's okay, and you forget how powerful these drugs are. I mean, it's taking Vicodin, in Xanax can be like drinking a bottle of tequila. I mean, the outcome is still the same, passing out Adolite with damage to your vehicle. So he probably finds himself in a situation where he is not able to handle these drugs as a result of the back surgeries that he's had through no fault of his own because he's been prescribed them, and all of a sudden you get into this kind of spiraling downward trend as a result of feeling as though you've got an invitation and license to take this because it's been prescribed to you. And guess what? That's DUI. So when you are under the influence of prescription drugs, it's the same as alcohol. And he was charged with driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs. And these are the ones that are kind of rubbing it in. Improper stopping, standing, or parking in an illegal place. I mean, so when he got out of his car, he went to go tie one of his shoes, which was already tied. He was slurring his words, clearly under the influence. So it's going to be very difficult for him to get out of this. He can do some community service and perhaps lessen the impact. But ultimately, the point is that driving under the influence of drugs like Vicodin, even if it's prescribed, is exactly as illegal as driving under the influence of alcohol, period, end of story. So pay attention to that. We have noted over the years that, many of our clients, long ago would change one problem, which is a back problem, for a drug addiction problem. And that's not good. So one of the things that is interesting now is that Kaiser, to their credit, they just opened a massive orthopedic center downtown at the arena, where they're focusing on rehab and exercise and stretching and acupuncture and chiropractic, et cetera, things that are proactive, that are not drug-based, but are proactive ways and modalities to treat a problem, so you can move forward, actually realign, strengthen, and heal the areas that have been impacted without the mask of the drugs that essentially don't cure the problem, they just mask the symptoms. So I got to give credit to Kaiser because they've kind of changed the way that they approach things, and I think the direction they're going is great. So thumbs up to them. All right, so the reason I bring up Tiger Woods, because that is non-drunk driving but impaired driving. And right now, California, according to a article in Sacramento Bee, they believe that the legal market under Proposition 64 for marijuana is going to be $5 billion. So, and that's coming. Today, they're actually debating how to approach some of the rules, and it looks like the California Bureau of Medical Cannabis Regulation will take over the recreational aspect of it. And the issue is now that this is legal. I mean, what exactly are the rules? And, how do you avoid breaking the rules? Because you don't want to get arrested. Just like if you're taking Vicodin, right? I mean, you go, well, I'm prescribed. How can I get a DUI? Well, if you're under the influence of Vicodin and you are impaired, that is driving under the influence of Vicodin, and you can get a DUI while taking prescription medication. So even if you're prescribed medicinal marijuana or you're using it recreationally, there are some rules. And the Sacramento Bee had a good article today, so I'll kind of break this down. I'll add a little bit of flesh to it from a legal perspective. But Sacramento Bee is a really great newspaper in that, and G, who's a kind of conservative producer in there, is waving his hands up and down, shaking his head. He's turning flush red. He's actually matching his shirt. It's hard for me to determine. He's got this chameleon thing going. So now he's looking up at the sky. So the way that I see the Sacramento Bee, having grown up in the San Francisco Bay Area and, graduated from UC Berkeley, being a curious history major. I mean, you've got articles from the Washington Post and the New York Times, from the McClatchy Group, from the Associated Press. So there's a large amalgam of information that you can glean from the Sacramento Bee. So support the Sacramento Bee. Sacramento Bee, in my opinion, it's a great paper. We're in the capital of the state of California. And I think it's a great paper. So if you have an opportunity to read the Sac Bee, I would definitely endorse that. All right, so here's one of the questions from the Sac Bee. Can I get in trouble for driving with marijuana in my car? So it's going to be a $100 infraction for driving with an open container. So what that means is that any receptacle of marijuana or marijuana products, right, and any container that has been opened or is open or has been previously opened or the seal is broken, if it's within reach of you, then at that point, that's open container. So you are subject to a $100 fine. So you want to keep that in your trunk. If you have a prescription for medicinal marijuana, then you can have a closed container. In other words, it's been open but is closed in the car, and you'll be fine. So the rules in regards to medicinal marijuana tend to be more liberal in regards to violation of the law. So if you already have a medicinal marijuana card, you might want to keep that because you're less inclined to get arrested for open container, or at least fined for open container, based upon the dichotomy or difference between recreational and medicinal. The next thing is, if you're driving under the influence of marijuana or not, how do the police basically determine this? And right now, there's not a very good test. So they have a mouth saliva swab test that they're using, but it takes like 8 minutes. And Tim Hodson was on the show. He does criminal defense, and he used to work in the public defender's office. And his advice is, don't submit to that, because at that point they have 8 minutes to observe you. We're not trying to enhance marijuana driving. We're not trying to let criminals off the hook here, but at the end of the day, you've got constitutional rights, and it really, if you do not have to be there for 8 minutes to be observed, then really that's your constitutional right not to do that. And so you want to keep that in mind. But the idea is that because THC is fat soluble, in other words, it stays in the system much longer than alcohol, you can have THC in your system, which really is a false positive because you're not actually under the influence of the psychotropic drug. You merely have it in your fat cells and you're metabolizing it, and it can show up. And just because it's in your system doesn't mean you're under the influence. That's a danger. I mean, nobody wants people to go to jail for having something in their system which is actually not impairing their ability to drive. Period. End of story. So basically pay attention to that, because right now we don't really have a good system, and they're trying to come up with it, but there's not a really good system to detect not necessarily the presence of THC, but whether or not from a legal perspective you're impaired. Here's an interesting one. Right now, 50% of all medical cannabis is delivered to people to their door. So it's like DoorDash or instead of getting a pizza delivered, right now 50% of medicinal marijuana is delivered via a delivery company. So the idea is what happens when on January 1st, 2018, the new rules go into play. And see, here's the thing: some places, some cities. California says, look, recreational marijuana is okay. Then it can be narrowed by municipality, so by county, by city. So Folsom says, look, man, we're not down with medicinal marijuana. Fine, because it's a residential, family-oriented city, and they're saying, look, we don't want dispensaries. Totally understandable. So the idea is, under California law in January, can medicinal marijuana be delivered? Can marijuana be delivered into Folsom? And under Prop 64, the answer is yes. So even if Folsom bans dispensaries, there still is going to be a legal right to deliver the marijuana into places that have banned it, and so that's something that you need to pay attention to. Basically, Prop 64 says local jurisdictions cannot ban delivery of cannabis products on public roads. So that's why it can go into places that have essentially municipalities that have said you can't sell it here, but it can actually be brought in via a courier service. So that's something to pay attention to. One of the things that I kind of noticed about this is that the medicinal marijuana rules, if you have a prescription, you're going to be in a much better place in terms of the law's protection than if you're just recreationally using it. So keep that in mind, because some people basically might stop their prescription because they can just use it recreationally. But keep in mind that the law is going to protect you in terms of open container and some other, and also taxation too. You won't have to pay sales tax on the medicinal marijuana that you will have to on the recreational marijuana. So pay attention to those things. There is a benefit to it. And, if you have a doctor helping you through the process, I think that's always a good idea. So keep that in mind. All right. So we're about ready to take a break. We'll go ahead and talk about extraterritorial jurisdiction and the Bachelor in Paradise, and how Mexican law is going to apply to a U.S. TV show. And we'll do that after the break. My name is Craig Ashton. The show is All Things Legal. Stay with us. All right, we're back. This is Craig Ashton. The show is All Things Legal. Curious personal injury attorneys distilling topical events into the legal essence. If you want to put a face to a voice, go to Ashton and Price LLP on Facebook. You can go to ashtonandprice.com. You can go to my Facebook page, Craig Fontaine Ashton, to get a general sense about who you're listening to. Before we took the break, talking about extraterritorial jurisdiction. Back in 1909, Oliver Wendell Holmes, very famous U.S. Supreme Court justice, basically said the predilection, the general rule is that the United States does not apply laws beyond its borders. So you can't basically go to Paris, get punched in the face by a surly bartender, and then sue them under the law of tort in under California law as a result of a assault and battery that happened in Paris. I love Paris. My law partner told me a great story. He was there, and my law partner's from Orange County. He's American through and through. So he went to a bar called the New York bar, so he figured, it'd be a bar that he could go to and they'd have some American. So he asked the bartender, he said, what beer would you recommend? And the bartender said, I recommend you don't drink beer. He recommended wine. So the moral of the story is that California law will not apply in France. So extraterritorial jurisdiction, the founding fathers basically said, look, our law is going to apply at the borders with some exceptions. Maritime law, if you're on a ship, many times U.S. law will apply. If you're an astronaut and you're flying over the planet, and something happens while you're in the space capsule, U.S. law will apply. But mostly the general rule is if you're in a different country, that country's law applies. So we've got this Corinne Olympios who's on Bachelor in Paradise. The reason I think they had her on that show is because she's extremely extroverted, does not mind expressing herself in whatever way feels comfortable to her, which makes for very good TV, but she doesn't have much of a filter in regards to her behavior as it vis-a-vis interaction with the opposite sex. So she was in a swimming pool with one of the contestants, and basically they're videotaping the whole thing. And she claims that she blacked out and there was some sexual behavior that occurred, and that she could not consent to it as a result of her inability to consent based upon her extreme state of inebriation. When it comes to rape, which basically this is what the allegation is, it is the slightest penetration through non-consensual interaction, basically. So when you enter into a contract, the contract is void if you are incompetent or if you are inebriated. Ultimately, if you are incompetent, you cannot enter into a contract. And in this particular case, from a sexual perspective, if she is so inebriated where she's blacking out and the sexual activity occurred, then technically speaking, that is sexual assault, that is rape. So the issue now is that this is going to be on video, and we talk about this on the show all the time, is the interesting thing about our current state of events in our society is that people share everything, so everything is on video. There is a new colloquialism or neologism that indicates that it's oversharing. People share everything. So in this particular case, they're in a pool, apparently drinking. The alcohol is being provided ostensibly by, I think, NBC. And so then the sexual activity occurs, but it's on video. So there's some interesting legal issues here. First of all, the video is going to be very good evidence as to what behavior was occurring to see whether or not her indication that she was blacked out and could not consent actually is borne out by the video. So that's going to be a very significant foundational understanding of what occurred, because it is a very serious thing to be sexually assaulted, and it is also a very serious thing to accuse somebody of rape when the facts don't bear that out, because either way, in either instance, somebody's life is going to be irretrievably altered and perhaps never be able to be made whole again. So we got to have the video. It's going to be very, very interesting. Then the next thing is we're in Mexico. And because we are in Mexico, there is no extraterritorial jurisdiction for this type of behavior that I'm aware of. Now, there are rules in regards to child molestation and pedophilia, which we can apply American law to tourists abroad and bring them back and charge them under American law. There are also laws pertaining to child custody and taking a child out of the United States to another country and applying a U.S. law under those circumstances. Maritime law, there are laws that apply, as I pointed out, if you're on an airplane, even if you're flying over another country, if it's a U.S. carrier, many times U.S. law will apply to what's going on the plane. But in this particular case, they're clearly in Mexico. So Mexican law is going to apply. And, Mexico's a slightly different cultural environment. I mean, all you have to do is watch Camera Infragante or, some of the shows. I mean, it's a very sexualized TV audience that you notice. I mean, just on these shows that I've watched, I don't speak much Spanish, but there tends to be a slightly different understanding, which is kind of decades before we've gotten to this point, where there seems to be more of a patriarchal understanding of the interaction between the sexes, which I don't know how the legal system is going to receive this based upon what's going on this video, because the culture in Mexico tends to be slightly different than ours, for sure. So it's going to be Mexican law will be applied within the confines of either a judge deciding the process or perhaps some sort of amalgamation of a jury trial. But that's going to be super interesting. Then the next issue is providing alcohol on the job. So what happens in shows like this is that they sign a waiver, and they know that their alcohol is going to be involved. So I mean, they're signing a legal document indicating, look, alcohol is going to be involved. We encourage you to express yourself. You are on your own in regards to your behavior. Do not overindulge. You need to keep your wits about you. But please know that anything you do, you're waiving your right to privacy, and you're going to be on video. So I thought it would be interesting, at least to let you know, in California, you can have alcohol on the job. I mean, my brother works in San Francisco Bay Area, and he works in San Francisco, and he's basically in the middle of Silicon Valley type experience where most everybody's a millennial down there, and they've got, you go into your work area and you got a beautiful view of the bay. You've got your work cubicle. There's a sleeping area. There's a rock wall. They got sushi for lunch, and then there's a beer on tap while you're working. So there's nothing wrong with having alcohol at work. And essentially what you want to do is, believe it or not, under the California law, the Fair Employment and Housing Act, if you are an alcoholic, that would be something that would be considered a disease, and you can get 12 weeks off to treat that. Now, it doesn't have to be paid, but ultimately it's considered a disease. And in California, it doesn't have to substantially limit, just the impairment has to limit your ability to perform your job, which I think is a good idea personally. But, puts employers, if you have 5 employees or more, then that would apply. So pay attention to that. Also, if somebody's religious at your office and doesn't imbibe, there's nothing wrong with serving alcohol, but try to be as careful as you can about their particular religious rights and feelings, because you don't want to put yourself in a position where they feel as though they're being discriminated against based upon their religion if alcohol is around. You just want to be sensitive to that, but again, there's nothing wrong with having alcohol on the job from a purely legal perspective. Anybody who's gone to a office Christmas party knows that alcohol in employment usually is not a great idea because typically there are unintended consequences to the experience which need to be paid attention to. And at the very least, it makes the week after Christmas a little bit uncomfortable and sometimes even worse. So the idea is, if you're an employer or an employee, make sure that you don't overindulge, because it really can impact your sense of well-being, perhaps your career, because at the end of the day, you're an employee at will. So, I mean, it's okay to get drunk at a Christmas party, but if you start dancing with the Christmas tree, there's a chance that you could get fired. And it's because if you don't have a contract, you're an employee at will, and you could be terminated. One of the things that's really important to understand is that in California, essentially the law is very clear. It says, look, it's not the behavior of the person that served the alcohol, it's the person who drank the alcohol. So if you're overserved at a bar, it's not going to be the bar's fault if you go out and hurt somebody or hurt yourself. It's going to be your fault. Now, if they overserve you and it's obvious, there could be a misdemeanor from a criminal perspective. If you serve a minor, then there's going to be issues. But if you are an adult, you have to own your behavior as somebody who's drunk, and the person serving you and the company, Budweiser, is not going to be responsible for your behavior. If you wanted to stop drunk driving, you would say, basically, alcohol is inherently dangerous, and we will hold Budweiser responsible, or Coors responsible, or Don Julio responsible for any accident that causes injury as a result of using their product. And at that point, guaranteed, there would be a lot of warnings, and also you hold the bar responsible, the restaurant. Guess what? There would be no over-serving anymore at all because of the legal liability. We basically say, forget that. We as a free society say, look, you need to take responsibility for your own action, and when it comes to alcohol, if you drink too much, it ain't the bar's fault, it ain't Budweiser's fault, it's your fault, and you bear the responsibility. So the only way that is an exception, and this happened recently in Sacramento, is that sometimes you will be drinking and it'll be part of your job. So it happens in cases more often than any other scenario whereby, let's say somebody's a bartender, and they get off, and then they sit at the bar, and they start drinking. And then the argument goes is that they're benefiting the bar because they're staying there, their friends are coming, it's making the bar look more packed, it's making it look more vibrant, and as a result, the drinking of the alcohol actually is benefiting the business. And so when they get you drunk while you're benefiting the business and you are still under the influence of the alcohol that they provided you while you're benefiting the business, then the argument goes is that the actions of the business are the actions of the employee, because the employee actually, even though they weren't on the job, but they were benefiting the business by bringing people in and making it seem more vibrant and benefiting the business from a financial perspective, that if they hurt somebody, then you can impute that behavior onto the business. It's very, very rare. But if you're having a barbecue and Uncle Ted drinks too much and Uncle Ted basically runs over his foot in the parking lot, that's not your fault. That's Uncle Ted's fault. You're going to bear no civil responsibility whatsoever as a result of the behavior of Uncle Ted if he drinks too much Don Julio at your barbecue. The rules in regards to marijuana aren't fully fleshed out yet, but I would imagine that the direction for if you serve marijuana, let's say marijuana brownies at one of your barbecues, then I would imagine the law is going to go in that direction. I haven't read anything that specifically identifies whether or not alcohol and marijuana be treated the same, but I suspect based upon the societal understanding that we as Californians want to take responsibility for our own actions and not impute our actions on somebody else. If that's our responsibility, then marijuana is probably going to be the responsibility of the person using it. All right, so when we take a break, we'll come back and we'll talk about Dennis Rodman, a Philadelphia Quaker, and a 1799 law that says he can't talk to Kim Jong-un about United States policy without the approval of Donald Trump. We'll do that after the break. All right, I'm back. This is Craig Ashton. The show is All Things Legal. This is where I am distilling topical events into the legal essence. I was a history major at Berkeley. I went to Pepperdine. But at Berkeley, guess what? I read a lot, and a lot of these issues that I talk about, basically the law is basically a distillation of history in regards to the appropriate level of human interaction. That's basically what it is. It just codifies where the lines of self-interest are and which ones you can cross and which ones you can't, and then puts those in writing so we all kind of understand the rules. I mean, try to play Monopoly without rules. I mean, it doesn't work, right? So, I mean, pass go, you got to play $200, whatever it is. I mean, there's going to be rules. So history is essentially the distillation of human interaction into a codified set of interaction based upon lines of self-interest, really. All right, so let's talk about Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman used to play for the Chicago Bulls. Kind of got famous by wearing boas. He's got tattoos all over his body, piercings in his ear and his lips and his nose. And somehow he became kind of a buddies with Kim Jong-un, who's a son of Kim Jong-il, who is a son of Kim Il-sung. It's called the Hermit country because essentially they don't intentionally let any outside information in. And the citizens ostensibly believed that, I think it was Kim Jong-il, did not defecate because he transcended that. First time he played golf, he shot an 18, routinely bowls 300. I think Kim Jong-il was the largest consumer of, I think it was Crevassier. He had a private train that went directly, I think, from North Korea to Russia, where he would get all the alcohol sent back. So anyway, it's just a really crazy, and on top of that, they have nuclear weapons. So Dennis Rodman, quote unquote, is on a mission in his new visit to North Korea. Last time he was there, he got a little bit too drunk, I think, sang in a breathy voice of Marilyn Monroe, "Happy Birthday" to Kim Jong-un, who is in his 30s, kind of praised by Donald Trump as to say that he's very smart because he's able to maintain power at his age. So there is a unusual kind of really indirect détente that is trying to occur based upon tweeting and now Dennis Rodman going over there to talk to Kim Jong-un. So when Dennis Rodman arrived, an individual that had been held as a result of defacing, being charged with defacing one of the portraits of the leaders there, I think he got 15 years and then was there for a couple of years and ended up in a coma, and then he just came home. So Dennis Rodman's over there. So here's the issue. Back in 1799, the Logan Act was passed based upon the actions of a man named George Logan, who was a Philadelphia Quaker. And George Logan wanted to go over to France and talk to them about making sure that we don't have too much foreign entanglement and maybe keeping out of some military activity. And the Congress passed a law which basically outlawed any private individual going to a foreign country to discuss the foreign policy of the United States of America as a private citizen. Only one person has ever been indicted under the act, and nobody's ever actually been prosecuted, and it's been around since 1799. It's United States Code Section 953, January 30th, 1799. And basically what it says is any citizen of the United States, whoever he may be, so Dennis Rodman, without authority of the United States, and that's unclear as to whether or not Donald Trump has tapped Dennis Rodman as our emissary to North Korea, directly or indirectly commences or carries on any correspondence or intercourse with any foreign government or any officer or agent thereof. So the question becomes, what is Dennis Rodman doing? If Dennis Rodman is over there on his own accord, speaking only for Dennis Rodman, and I was just saying as the show began, can you imagine? North Korea really doesn't have much understanding as to what the United States is. And their one real representation of what an American looks like is Dennis Rodman. And the way he, I mean, they must not really understand what the United States is at this point. Because I mean, he would really be, I mean, if you've never had an interaction with, can you imagine if you've never had an interaction with a North Korean before? And then Dennis Rodman showed up, and that would be your idea of what North Koreans are like. I mean, that would be kind of shocking, I think. So the point is, whether or not he's in violation of a 1799 act called the Logan Act. Nobody's ever been prosecuted for it. I doubt that he ever will, but it is kind of interesting in that Dennis Rodman is over on a mission, quote unquote, to meet with Kim Jong-un, a nuclear-wielding dictator in a hermetically sealed environment, probably the most hermetically sealed informational country on the planet, over there interacting with the dictator, perhaps on behalf of the United States, as a result of being sent over by the former host of The Apprentice. Now, 50 years from now, they're going to be teaching this at Berkeley in history class. It's going to be U.S. history. And it's going to be a kind of an amazing undertaking because the dynamic of the information and the way that the history is flowing is in such an odd and unique direction that I don't think anybody could have anticipated this. All right, so that's the Logan Act. That's Dennis Rodman. Let's talk about this mediation I had yesterday. So on June 29, 2015, really, really nice lady. She worked for University of Montana. Now she works for UC Davis, and she's an accountant for them. She was involved in an accident where an employee of FedEx ran a red light, and then at the scene came to her window. She was stunned. She had bruises, and we got statements from her coworkers said they've never seen a bruise that dark in their life before, and there's pictures of it. But I think both cars had to be towed from the scene. But the FedEx employee went to her window and said, "Why did you run the red light?" So our client just sat there shocked. I mean, she's 60 years old today. And she just sat there and what are you talking about? Because it's a very helpless feeling when you're dealing with a situation where it's your word against somebody else's. And you're injured and your car's damaged and you're shocked, and then somebody's basically trying to blame it on you. People tend to be creative with the truth when there are consequences, but when you're working for a corporation like this, that's to me reprehensible. So fortunately for her, there was a witness at the scene that was stopped, going in the same direction as the FedEx driver, and the person said, "Look, that guy blew by me through the red light. He was clearly at fault." And the police officer not only found FedEx in violation of running the red light, but actually gave them a citation, which many times they won't do, because ultimately they don't want to put themselves in a position where they're rubbing salt in the wound. So they say, "Look, you violated the light, but I'm not going to write you up." In this case, they gave them a citation. So our client ultimately went through physical therapy, tried chiropractic, et cetera, and her problem kept progressing. And she ultimately was offered curative 3-level surgery, which was a fusion and a disc replacement hybrid, which is state-of-the-art surgery. So we sent a
You've been listening to the All Things Legal Show with your host, Craig Ashton. For more information or to download the latest podcast, go to ashtonandprice.com or call 916-786-7787. Remember, for the best advice, don't think twice. Call Ashton and Price.